Hello and welcome to GB News at ARC Conference. I'm Darren Grimes and I'm delighted to be joined by the one and only Nigel Farage, of course, of this parish. Nigel, thank you very much for joining us.
Not one bit.
Now, Nigel, you're here at ARC Conference. A lot of conferences like this take place where there's a lot of talking that actually happens. We'd quite like some action as well, wouldn't we?
Well, we would, because the whole point about political movements is they need an intellectual base behind them. So if conferences like this can provide the bedrock upon which political action can be built, then great. The problem is, where is the political action going to come from? And frankly, whatever great ideas come out of this current Conservative Party won't adopt any of it. They're not conservative. They've completely forgotten the Judeo-Christian roots upon which the country was built. They've become big state, surveillance state, high tax. The only time what comes out of here will start to have influence, and when GB News will become very powerful, I think, is after the Conservatives lose the next election. And I'm now at the point of saying they deserve to lose the next election.
Yeah.
But actually, more than that, they need to lose the next election to rethink who they are, what they are, a bit like way back in 1975.
But Nigel, are you not really worried about what a Labour government with a substantial majority, if the polls are to be believed, would actually do to the country?
Well, I don't see Starmer's very different to Sunak, really. I mean, Sunak's clearly socially a bit more conservative than Starmer, but in terms of the proposals we're seeing on the table, unless you've got kids at private school, what is there to fear?
Yeah. Well, Nigel, your influence on this matter probably holds quite some significant weight, because even the Collins English Dictionary, Nigel, have acknowledged debanking as a word.
Yeah.
How extraordinary.
When I started talking about debanking, people said, "You what? What's that? That's not a word." Well, it is now. And that's because it didn't just happen to me. When I spoke out about this back in July, it suddenly emerges that 1 million people have been debanked. So, yeah, well done, Collins. I hope the OED follow. I'm sure they will. But I've actually here uncovered a very real scandal affecting men and women in this country, small businesses in an even more grievous way, I think. And this is one of those campaigns that I've kicked off that's going to last year after year after year, because we've had some very fine words from the government on this. Thus far, no action from the FCA whatsoever. And we learnt today that the FCA spent £250,000 on their review into the debanking scandal. Now, had they done their job in the first place, rather than trying to push upon financial services companies diversity and inclusion agendas and quotas, we may not have needed to spend any of that money at all. So the public are now aware of it. The banks are jumping around. NatWest did not bring in the cash restrictions in September they proposed. So some little victories.
Yes.
Some changes of perception. Changes of narrative coming from government, but as yet no legislative change. And I want to fight ultimately for everybody to have the right to have a bank account. And I say that not because I want big government to tell the free market what to do, but in the modern world, access to a bank account is as essential as water and electricity.
To be debanked is to be depersoned in the modern world.
Well, and I loved it last week when I got the subject access request back from NatWest. And one of them wrote on one of the group WhatsApp chats, have we forced Farage out of the country?
Oh, wow.
Hooray! Because you become a non-person.
Yes.
Well, I tell you what, they picked on the wrong bloke.
They did indeed. Now, Nigel, the scenes that we saw last night from London's Liverpool Street, obviously a major train station in the United Kingdom, and we witnessed occupation of that station by pro-Palestinian protesters. Some, dare I say, who may even share sentiments with likes of Hamas, a terrorist-prescribed organisation in this country. I wonder, we're reflecting here at this conference on social cohesion and the social fabric that binds us all together as one United Kingdom. I'm sorry, but I think that social fabric really is being unpicked in this country.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen up in Leicester last year running street battles between Muslim and Hindu I wasn't going to say gangs, but no gatherings of people. And now we see a political agenda playing out of the streets of this country, where the politics of the Middle East is now writ large in London, in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Edinburgh, and elsewhere. In 2015, in the general election campaign, I said, unless we're careful, we will build in our country a fifth column whose views and aims will at some point run entirely in contradiction with the stated aims of our elected government. I cannot tell you the abuse that I took for daring to say that. In fact, my personal security after that comment had to move to 24/7. People living with us in the house. Yeah. It was that bad. For daring to say that mass uncontrolled immigration, without discriminating, yes, I've used the word, discriminating, choosing who can come into a country, would lead to problems. Well, I hate to say I was right, but here we are. The scary thing is this. At the moment, I'm not quite sure what we do, because the numbers we're dealing with here are simply huge. Simply huge. But the danger is not just those protesting. The danger is the way the police are dealing with this, and the fact that average people are saying, if they're letting them do this, how can we respect anything in this country?
Absolutely, and it seems incredibly one-sided, Nigel, where the police apply the law to one side, the pro-Jewish side perhaps.
Yeah.
They were taking down pictures, Nigel, of kidnapped Israeli children, the police, to avoid increasing social tension. Yeah. Yet they allow something like London Liverpool Street to be occupied in that way. You can see the imbalance there, can't you?
This is socially the most dangerous thing I've seen in this country in my lifetime. And we're going to have to try and get tough. We may win, we may not, but we're going to have to try and get tough and lay down the law and say this, enough is enough. It's going to be one hell of a battle. It's going to go on for a very long time. I saw Brandon Lewis last night tweeting out a picture of Liverpool Street. This is unacceptable in modern Britain. Your party did it.
Absolutely.
Blair, Mandelson, Campbell were the architects. This is the diversity they wanted, but the truth is 13 years of conservatism has made it even worse. We are in trouble.
We are indeed. Now, Nigel, just finally, the COVID inquiry into the lockdowns and all the rest of it, do you suppose that this, at vast taxpayer expense, is going to amount to nothing more than a total whitewash?
Well, it's going to take so long that by the time we get a conclusion, it'll be too late to learn anything. Nobody will be held accountable. And what it does tell us is a couple of things. Number one, that these people in Downing Street making decisions were fighting like ferrets in a sack then, and they still are now. And number two, what it tells us is that Boris Johnson did not have that quality that is needed for leadership, which is to be decisive and consistent in a crisis. You see, when Margaret Thatcher was in government and they faced the miners' strike, they faced recession, inflation, Argentina, you name it, they stuck together.
Absolutely.
Why? They were bound together by a core ideology. Johnsonism was only ever about opportunism. Johnsonism was about taking Farageism and trying to claim it for himself. Well, that's what it was.
It was.
But there was never really an intellectual coherent basis behind Boris or what happened in number 10. And that's why they will lose the next election and deserve to do so.
Well, there we are. The next Mystic Meg, Nigel Farage. We've heard it here first. Nigel, thank you for your time.